Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network, and yes, that's right, we're back with the Truth Attack. Okay, so we are the Liberty Works Radio Network, and we do need the support of the members of the listening audience to keep the network broadcast operating and the shows and the information coming. So if you enjoy the show, the information, the lectures, the topics, the discussions, and the guests and the hosts on the other shows on the network, we sure would appreciate it if you could find your way over to the LibertyWorksRadioNetwork.com website and get signed up as a monthly subscribing member. Even if it's as little as $10, $20 a month, we do need your support to keep the network operating. So get on board, give us a hand, tell your neighbors, friends, relatives, business associates, partners, and everybody else in America that the information to take back our country and our freedom and our liberty and our right to work, which was never the legitimate subject of federal taxation. Find your way over to tax-freedom.com and get educated, and come on over to the LibertyWorksRadioNetwork.com and join the march to liberty and the restoration of the constitutional freedom that we're supposed to have but are being denied by the government's de facto enforcement of what can only be described as the second plank of the Communist Manifesto in place of legitimate constitutional taxation. Why do I say that? Because the second plank of the Communist Manifesto is a heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax. That's where income taxation came from, the Communist Manifesto. It is straight up communism, class warfare that divides the people and keeps them fighting amongst themselves for all eternity, while the political class is constantly called on to assume more power to end the class war conflict they engineered by writing different law for the different classes in the tax brackets. It's all unconstitutional, it's not uniform, it's not apportioned, the whole system is a fraud, and the Supreme Court has exposed it. So we're going to get into that again. I've been talking about that for the last few months, and I'm going to continue talking about it till the rest of the country understands the income tax, as enforced by the IRS, the DOJ, and the lower federal courts today, is a complete and total constitutional fraud. It is responsible for nearly everything: the debt, the conflict, the class warfare, the division in philosophies, the division in parties. It's all based on the government's ability to reach into your pocket and steal as much as they want before you ever get paid, and tell you there's nothing you can do about it except sit there and take it like a slave. Well, it's all fraud. It's all intended to replace the republic with a social democracy that replaces God with government and makes you worship and pay for everything the government does without regard for the effect it has on your spirit, the collective spirit, the quality of life, or the population. Because socialism is about preserving the government, not the people, not the rights of the people, not their property, not their freedom, not their liberty. It's about preserving the government, which never wants anything to change. You don't believe me? Look at North Korea. There's a pure socialist democracy, right? The people get to vote. Yeah, they all get to vote. Doesn't mean a goddamn thing, does it? No, because they're not free. In a democracy, you serve the state. It's only in the constitutional republic that you are allowed to remain free to serve God in place of the government or the king or the emperor or the pharaoh or whatever they call the leadership of the nation in your era. It's all a fraud. And the Supreme Court has exposed it as a fraud the same way they exposed Roe v. Wade as being a fraud, the same way they exposed Chevron as being a fraud, the same way they exposed affirmative action as being a fraud. They have exposed the direct enforcement of the income tax by the IRS based on sources as a complete and total constitutional fraud. Okay, we're going to get back into that in a bit, but let's do a little bit of the current news. There isn't a whole lot to go over, but I wanted to point out last week I challenged Schumer to go ahead. Don't vote for the continuing resolution. Shut down the government. See what Donald Trump does with it. And apparently he was listening because, of course, come Friday, he backed down and switched sides with 8 others to support the continuing resolution because, and I think he was right, which is why, of course, I challenged him last week to do it. I think he was right. If he had let the government shut down, Trump would have taken that opportunity to close out a whole bunch of stuff, not just half the Department of Education. He could have gone after all these other departments that don't exist under the Constitution and shouldn't be federally funded operations, like agriculture, housing, transportation, labor, commerce, environmental protection, occupational safety, energy. None of these departments should exist. They're all state functions that have been usurped by the federal government's ability to usurp through its unlimited access to printed capital, which the states don't have access to, so they can't pay for these things. So the federal government stepped into the vacuum and they'll take care of it for you. You don't have to worry about a thing. Your education system will soon be centrally planned and everyone will be learning not reading, writing, arithmetic, but critical race theory, gender dysmorphia, new math, where we don't memorize the tables, we count matchsticks and put them in groups of 10, and it takes us 45 minutes to multiply 10 times 11. Oh, isn't that wonderful? I'm sure those candidates will do just fine in their first job. They just won't be allowed anywhere near the money. You got a broom in your hand for the rest of your life. That's what the education system is producing. George Carlin was 100% right. The system's broken intentionally. They don't want smart people. They don't want critical, independent thinkers. They want people just smart enough to run the machines and push the buttons and not get their arm cut off every time they do. But not smart enough to understand anything at all about their existence, the Constitution, freedom, or philosophy, which of course is what the Constitution is really all about. A philosophy for government that places God at the head and the sovereign people next. And then comes the representative government. But not in the socialist democracy. God doesn't exist. Government replaces God, and the people exist to serve the government. It's a slave system. It's not one of representative government. It's not constitutional. It's socialist democracy, and that's why the Democrats keep yelling about democracy, democracy, democracy. I'm so sick of listening to these idiots. These idiots. Democracy, democracy. You moron. You don't live in a democracy. You live in a constitutional republic. Yes, it's a democratic form of government in the sense that we have a system of one man, one vote. But it's not a democracy because the majority doesn't rule. We don't have a mob rule system, which is what the democracy is. And the original philosophers pointed out that every single democracy implodes as soon as the people realize they can vote themselves the treasury. And they do. And the currency is run out into oblivion and the nation falls. So the philosophy that government comes ahead of God is what democracy is all about. And of course, that's the primary aim of communism, right? That's why the first thing they do is tax the churches. Got to get rid of God. Can't have anybody interfering with our authority. Because it's not about the quality of the life of the spirit. It's only about our control of the physical bodies. Because the spiritual existence isn't recognized by government other than to take advantage of and abuse it by seizing control of the alleged gateway to the spirit, which is what the church did for 1,000 years, right? You can't get to God without going through the church. Yeah, check. That's man usurping authority he doesn't possess. So, you have a fundamental philosophical battle being played out across the eons of time between the forces that believe in God and the forces that believe in the power of man to rule the body in place of God's rule of the spirit, which of course includes the physical. Because mind over matter, the spirit is supreme to the body. It can carry the body through ordeals and trials that are unimaginable. It's not the body that carries the spirit, it's the spirit that carries the body. And it's the spirit that God cares about. That's why you see so many bad things happening to the physical. God doesn't really care about the physical. That's not his domain. His domain is the spiritual, and that's what he is concerned about. The physical tests become tests of the spirit to attempt to improve and move the spirit to fulfill its potential. And most people are focused on the body and survival. It's more important to eat than it is to worship or be spiritually perfect. And the compromises that the physical existence demands gradually become sins committed against the others, transgressions either of the physical existence or of the spiritual by oppression or abuse, taking advantage of somebody else's ignorance or enslaving them with whips and chains. It all amounts to one group of men demanding that everybody else serve them and denying the existence of God. And that's the battle we see playing out. The Democrats want the power. They don't want to give it up. You know, you had how many hundreds of billions of dollars in COVID fraud go out the door? The Democrats don't want to investigate it. They don't want to claw back the money. They don't want to know who did it. Gee, I wonder why. What, was it the Democrat Party that did that, that took all the money fraudulently? So, of course, they don't want to claw it back. It was all their families that got the money. Democrat Party approval is down at 30%. 30%. I mean, the party has lost. I've said before, it's no longer the Democratic Party. It's become the Socialist Party of America. It's no longer led by Pelosi, Biden, and Schumer. It's led by Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and AOC. It is full-blooded, stone cold, the Socialist Party. The whole party is attacking Schumer for not shutting down the government. We should have shut down the government. They still don't understand that if Schumer had let them shut down the government, Trump would have wiped out half the agencies in the government and closed them permanently. They'd never go back to work. At least that's what he should have been thinking about doing. So it's the left who today are going nuts, right? They're attacking Schumer. They're attacking Tesla stations because Elon Musk is weeding out waste and fraud and abuse. Oh, and that's a problem. They don't want the government smaller. They want it bigger because that's how they take over your life. That's how they get more money every year. That's how they keep growing in power and usurping the authority that they shouldn't be exercising in the first place. But they have to usurp the authority in order to settle the warfare, the class warfare, the conflict they engineered with the different laws between the different groups. So you have the poor calling to tax the rich, and the rich saying, we already pay enough. Everyone should pay a fair share. And it's all nonsense. Show me the word fair share. Show me how interest, dividends, commissions, annuities, salaries, wages are subject to indirect taxation under Article 1, Section A. They're not unless they're foreign. That's the only way they're taxable because that's the only way the federal government has authority to tax those sources. And of course, it's the left that are back to the violence, attacking the Tesla stations. You know, I think I hear the first break coming up. So this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour. Find your way over to the website, get signed up. Find your way over to taxfreedom.com, get educated. Help us bring back and restore the constitutional republic. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and as I was saying when we came up on that commercial break, it's the left, the radical left, the liberals who are violent and who are condoning the violence and practicing it. We saw that, of course, with the Black Lives Matter for almost a year when they burned down every liberal city in the country that let them protest. And no one was prosecuted. Of course, you had a mostly peaceful protest at the Capitol, and 1,500 people spent 3 years in jail under the Nazis of the Democrat Party, who put the protesters in jail. And here they burned down half the country. Nobody got charged. And again, they lose the election. And now they're out attacking and burning the Tesla dealerships. I mean, and the liberal pundits in the news media seem to be egging it on and condoning it and laughing about it. And so are the liberal audiences. They're applauding it. So we can see plainly and clearly which side of the table is advocating for and using violence. And it isn't the Republicans. It's the Democrats and the far left liberals trying to destroy America. Which, by the way, Trump is doing a good job of restoring. The inflation numbers are down below 3% for the first time since Biden took office and raised the price of oil. The price of oil is down below $70 for the first time since Biden took office and drove the price to $125 a barrel and the price of gas to $7. Now, the price of gas is coming down, the price of oil is coming down, the inflation rate is less than 3%, the long-term interest rate is coming down. You've basically turned the corner on all of the key indicators, and the only thing the media wants to talk about is a recession, a recession, a recession. Well, I've been telling you for 3 years, Biden put you in a recession, and right now you're feeling pretty much what I think is the bottom of it, as Trump can turn the corner here. If you can get the price of oil back down to $60 a barrel or better, that will ease up the price pressures all over the country and should begin to stir economic stimulus again. His tariff policies are intended not to punish importers of goods, but to equalize the playing table. Do you realize there's a 250% tariff on American dairy products sent into Canada? 250%! And it's been that way for years. Canada tariffs everything we send there because we produce it cheaper and better. So they have to raise the price of our products to convince people to buy theirs. And the American government has basically let them get away with it. So the tariffs will result in each country adopting better trade policies. We won't tax you if you don't tax us. And if you tax us, you're going to get reciprocal treatment with your goods here. So eventually this will work out with all the nations deciding not to tax each other so much, and they'll strike some balances that reduce taxes on trade, which will be good for everyone. And yeah, there's going to be a little bit of turmoil when you turn the corner at the bottom from unbelievably stupid policies under Joe Biden to rational, common sense, intelligence policies under Trump, which advocate for better business and more prosperity, not sacrificing everything in the name of some environmental god that doesn't exist. So, oil and the cost of fuel and energy is the key to an economic recovery. You bring down the cost of oil, you bring down the cost of gas, you bring down the cost of diesel oil, you bring down the cost of heating fuel. Everybody gets a break on everything. Driving to work, running the business, heating the home, cooling the office. The surcharge on diesel fuel for trucking food to the stores goes away. Everything hinges on the price of energy. When energy is cheap, the economy booms. People can play, they can experiment, they can hire, they can do more. When energy is expensive, you can't even afford to get to work 5 days a week. One implies a booming economy, the other implies a dying economy. And you can't toss out oil and carbon until you have a network of viable replacements already behind it, and you have none. And you can't take away or shut down the gas and oil and tell people, oh, you just have to do without or pay $10 until we can get all the solar fields up and figure out how to make them work at night and how to make the windmills work when there's no wind. Yeah, right. And that's the Democrat plan. Morons, absolute morons. And as I say, the liberal media is inciting all of this. I mean, there isn't anyone who can defend any of this, which is pretty obvious now from what you see on that TV from the Trump administration talking to these people. Their questions are stupid. If you want to fix housing in this country, the federal government needs to subsidize the loan rate for first-time home buyers at like 2%. That's how you get home going again, is you subsidize the interest rate for home buyers so they can actually afford to buy a home instead of being enslaved to a mortgage for years. Okay, let's shift gears here and talk a little bit about what's happening on the tax front. I was reading last week as the show closed the Supreme Court's position for years and years on the federal tax. But I'm going to pick up where we left off on that. But before we do that, let's go ahead and talk about here for a moment what the IRS and the DOJ and the lower courts have been doing since, well, 1980 in precedent, but really since 1955. This is from the IRS's frivolous positions document, where they lay out the arguments that they consider to be, because the lower courts have ruled, that these are frivolous. And this is contention number 6 in the section of their argument about constitutional arguments in the 16th Amendment. And their contention number 6 reads, the 16th Amendment does not authorize a direct, non-apportioned federal income tax on United States citizens. Now that's the contention, that the 16th Amendment does not authorize a direct non-apportioned tax. And they say that's frivolous because some assert that the 16th Amendment does not authorize a direct non-apportioned income tax, and thus U.S. citizens and residents are not subject to federal income tax law. So that's the proposition that they're going to attack. And here's what they say the law is. The constitutionality of the 16th Amendment has invariably been upheld when challenged. What the hell does that mean? The constitutionality? It's in the Constitution. Of course it's part of it. It's not that the amendment is... What does the amendment mean? This is just nonsense. The constitutionality of the 16th Amendment has invariably been upheld. That's just nonsense. That means nothing. How has it been upheld? In what manner? What did they actually say? Well, let's go on. And numerous courts have both implicitly and explicitly recognized that the 16th Amendment authorizes a non-apportioned direct income tax on United States citizens and that federal tax laws as applied are valid. They cite United States v. Collins and say the court cited to Brushaber v. Union Pacific Railroad and noted that the U.S. Supreme Court has recognized that the 16th Amendment authorizes a direct, non-apportioned tax upon United States citizens throughout the nation. So that's their position. And they cite a whole bunch of cases in the lower courts as the basis for that. They cite United States v. Collins in the 10th Circuit, N.R.E. Beckrith in the 9th Circuit, Lavelle v. United States in the 7th Circuit, Broughton and Young in the 8th Circuit. So every circuit has its own version of this. Hey, it's a direct, non-apportioned tax on everything the citizens to do. That's what the 16th Amendment says. Okay? But wait a minute, let's go back to what we were reading last week, keeping in mind that what the IRS says is it's a direct, non-apportioned tax on everything you do. Where they got the authority to tax everything you do in the 50 states, they claim it's the 16th Amendment. Well, let's see what the Supreme Court said. I'm not going to reread what I read last week. I'm going to kind of pick up where I left off. Duties and imposts are terms commonly applied to levies made by governments on the importation or exportation of commodities. Excises are taxes laid upon the manufacture, sale, or consumption of commodities within the country, upon licenses to pursue certain occupations, and upon corporate privileges. The requirement to pay such taxes involves the exercise of the privilege, and if business is not done in the manner described, no tax is payable. It is the privilege which is the subject of the tax and not the mere buying, selling, or handling of goods. In other words, it's not income that is the subject of the tax. It's the privilege of incorporation. And of course, excise is one of the indirect taxes. So how is it a direct tax under the 16th Amendment if it's an indirect tax in the form of an excise on the corporate privilege? And if it's on privileges, how did it ever reach your right to work, which isn't derived from any privilege of incorporation, as is true with the corporate person? And through that privilege of incorporation, the corporate person becomes an inherently federally taxable person. But the American citizen is not an inherently federally taxable person. We exist by right, not privilege. We work by right. We labor by right. We earn money by right. We earn rent, interest, dividends, commissions, annuities, alimony, tips, salaries, wages. It's all earned by right, not taxable privilege. Let's read a little more. The tax under consideration, as we have construed the statute, may be described as an excise upon the particular privilege of doing business in a corporate capacity, i.e., with the advantages which arise from corporate or quasi-corporate organization, or when applied to insurance companies for doing the business of such companies. As was said in the Thomas case, 192 U.S. Supra, the requirement to pay such taxes involves the exercise of privileges, and the element of absolute and unavoidable demand is lacking. If business is not done in the manner described in the statute, no tax is payable. If we are correct in holding that this is an excise tax, there is nothing in the Constitution requiring such taxes to be apportioned according to population. They cite Pacific Insurance v. Sewell, Springer v. United States, Spreckles Sugar, Flint v. Stone Tracy, and Thomas v. United States. All major important decisions in income tax. Now here's more. Evidently, Congress adopted the income as the measure of the tax to be imposed with respect to the doing of business in corporate form, because it desired that the excise should be imposed, approximately at least, with regard to the amount of benefit presumably derived by such corporation from the current operations of the government. That cites Flint v. Stone Tracy and goes on. It was held that Congress, in exercising the right to tax a legitimate subject of taxation as a franchise or a privilege, was not debarred by the Constitution from measuring the taxation by the total income, although derived in part from property which, considered by itself, was not taxable. It was reasonable that Congress should fix upon gross income without distinction as to source as a convenient and sufficiently accurate index of the importance of the business transacted. So they're talking about income being the measure of an impost, duty, or excise tax. It's not a direct tax. It's an impost, duty, or excise. It measures the amount of the indirect tax owed. There's more. As repeatedly held, this did not extend the taxing power to new subjects, because citizens weren't subject before the amendment and they weren't subject afterwards, but merely removed the necessity which otherwise might exist for an apportionment among the states of taxes laid on income. But it's only income derived from federally taxable activity and transactions, not all income earned by any person in all 50 states. That's the fraud. That's been perpetrated since World War II and the victory tax, which was just such an unconstitutional tax. And they got away with it. And then they implemented the employment tax laws after World War II to give us what we have today, a complete and totally constitutionally fraudulent system. We'll be back in 5. not hearing the music. Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is a Truth Attack Hour, and let's get right back into it. I was reading historically from what the Supreme Court has said about the income tax and comparing that to what they say today, which is, remember at the beginning of this, I said, read the part where they argue from their frivolous argument positions document that it's frivolous to argue the tax is not a direct tax under the 16th Amendment. And what the court says is whether the tax is to be classified as an excise is in truth not of critical importance. If not that, it is an impost. They refer to Pollock v. Farmers Loan, Pacific Insurance v. Sewell or Sobel, and or a duty, VZ Bank, Fenno and Wall, Pollock v. Farmers, Knowlton v. Moore, or so they say whether it's to be classified as an excise is not of critical importance. If not that, it is an impost or a duty, a capitation or other direct tax. It certainly is not. It's from 1937, Stewart Machine Company versus Collector. So the Supreme Court directly contradicts what the IRS and the DOJ have been telling you since 1955. The Supreme Court says it's indirect of either impost, duty, or excise. It's not a direct tax. And the IRS says it's a direct tax, and that's why you owe it, because the 16th Amendment taxes all sources and removes the limitation from the taxing powers to let them tax everything you do, your work, your labor, your earnings, your interest, your dividends, your salaries, your wages, your commissions, your annuities, your alimony, your tips, your Social Security, all of it because they can tax directly under the 16th Amendment. So let's read what the Supreme Court said last June in Moore. Basically, they talk about how, here, let's read it. After independence in 1776 and under the Articles of Confederation, the federal government relied primarily on contributions from the states. And it goes on saying the expenses and the needs were greater than they could raise. So they got together, a national government's continuing revenue problems under the Articles of Confederation helped prompt the Constitutional Convention that convened in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. The Federalist number 30, Alexander Hamilton, the framers responded to the revenue problem by granting Congress an expansive taxing power. Okay, listen up, here we go. Article 1 of the Constitution affords Congress broad power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. That power includes two great classes of taxes, direct taxes and indirect taxes, citing Bruce Shaber v. Union Pacific. Generally speaking, direct taxes are those taxes imposed on persons or property. See National Federation of Independent Business v. Sebelius. That's the first healthcare decision. As a practical matter, however, Congress has rarely enacted direct taxes because the Constitution requires that direct taxes be apportioned among the states. To be apportioned, direct taxes must be imposed in proportion to the census or enumeration. That cites the Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4. See also Section 2, Clause 3. In other words, direct taxes must be apportioned among the states according to each state's population. So the Supreme Court says here that direct taxes are not unlimited under the 16th Amendment. They must still be apportioned, regardless of the 16th Amendment. They go on to explain. So if Congress imposed a property tax on every American homeowner, the citizens of a state with 5% of the population would pay 5% of the total property tax, even if the value of their combined property added up to only 3% of the total value of homes in the United States. To pay 5%, the tax rate on the citizens of that state would need to be substantially higher than the tax rate in a neighboring state with the same population, but more valuable homes. To state the obvious, that kind of complicated and politically unpalatable result has made direct taxes difficult to enact. Indeed, the parties have cited no apportioned direct taxes in the current Internal Revenue Code. And it appears that Congress has not enacted an apportioned direct tax since the Civil War. Well, how is that possible if the income tax enacted in 1913 is argued by the government to be a direct tax? Somebody's lying. Who do you think's lying, the Supreme Court or the IRS, the DOJ, and the lower liberal courts that gave us Roe v. Wade, Chevron, and affirmative action, all the other liberal nonsense from the 50s and the 60s and early 70s. Oh, let's go on. From the Supreme Court. By contrast, indirect taxes are the familiar federal taxes imposed on activities or transactions. That category of taxes includes duties, imposts, and excises, as well as income taxes. Okay, right here, the Supreme Court flat out tells you, income taxes are indirect. It's not the non-apportioned direct tax they've been enforcing on you. That's communism. Constitutional taxation says income taxes are indirect. They're the yardstick that measures the amount of money owed on the imposed duty or excise taxable activity. But if there is no foreign activity or importing or exporting or commodities or license or corporate activity, there's nothing to measure. There's no federally taxable activity or transaction occurring without an imposed duty or excise. Income only comes into play as the yardstick once you have an impost, a duty, or an excise being applied to some transaction or activity that was federally taxable. None of that exists. Labor isn't federally taxable by impost, duty, or excise. Only foreign labor. Okay, so by contrast, indirect taxes are the familiar federal taxes imposed on activities or transactions. Includes duties, imposts, and excise taxes, as well as income taxes. U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, Amendment 16. In other words, they're citing the 16th Amendment as part of the foundation for the income tax being an indirect tax, which directly contradicts the IRS DOJ frivolous argument positions document. Directly contradicts what they've been arguing in court. A tax is uniform when it operates with the same force and effect in every place where the subject of it is found. United States v. Tusansky. Because income taxes are indirect taxes, they are permitted under Article 1, Section 8 without apportionment. As this court has said, Article 1, Section 8's grant of taxing power is exhaustive, meaning that it could never reasonably be questioned from the founding that it included the power to lay and collect income taxes. Yeah, but not on citizens, only on businesses subject to the privilege. Founding that it included the power to lay and collect income taxes, Bruce Shaver. In 1861, Congress enacted the nation's first unapportioned income tax. The Civil War income tax was recognized as an indirect tax under the head of excises, duties, and imposts, citing Bruce Shaver and Springer v. United States. In 1895, however, in Pollock v. Farmers Loan and Trust, this court held that a tax on income from property equated to a tax on the property itself, and thus was a direct tax that had to be apportioned among the states. Citing Pollock v. Farmers Loan and Trust. The Pollock decision sparked significant confusion and controversy throughout the United States. Congress and the states responded to Pollock by approving a new constitutional amendment ratified in 1913. The 16th Amendment rejected Pollock's conflation of 1, income from property, and 2, the property itself. The amendment provides the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states and without regard to any census or enumeration. U.S. Constitution Amendment 16. Therefore, the 16th Amendment expressly confirmed what had been the understanding of the Constitution before Pollock. Taxes on income, including taxes on income from property, are indirect taxes that need not be apportioned, citing Bruce Shaver. Meanwhile, property taxes remain direct taxes that must be apportioned. See Helvering v. Independent Life. So if income taxes are indirect taxes, where the hell do the federal courts get subject matter jurisdiction to enforce the non-apportioned direct tax on income the IRS has been enforcing based on earning money? What do the courts say about that? As regards all courts of the United States inferior to this tribunal, 2 things are necessary to create jurisdiction, whether original or appellate. The Constitution must have given to the court the capacity to take it, and an act of Congress must have supplied it. To the extent that such action is not taken, the power lies dormant. And there's a list of 20 different cases cited as that authority. Without a constitutional authority to act, there is nothing the courts can do. There is no authority to tax income directly and without apportionment, only indirectly, which means through the original application of impost, duty, or excise, not the direct basis of a source of gross income under Section 61. Section 61 doesn't come into play until you have an impost, duty, or excise. And I've shown you, of course, that Section 61 was never domestic legislation. It only came into play to tax the sources of income earned in Canada, a foreign source subject to impost taxation. Now we need to know how much gross income. Everything from those sources earned in Canada between 1918 and 1993 was taxable, but never had any domestic application to compensation, interest, rent, dividends. None of those things are taxable when earned by the citizens in the 50 states. It's outside both the territorial jurisdiction of the federal government and the legislative jurisdiction of Congress. They can't interfere with the state's prerogative, exclusive jurisdictions, territorial and legislative. Federal government has no authority over labor anywhere in the Constitution, nowhere, unless it's the labor of a foreigner, taxed under Section 1441B. Salaries, wages, and compensation. That's the only labor in the federal code of Subtitle A, Title 26, Chapters 1 through 6. It's the only labor taxed in 1913 by the original tax. What more? A court may not render a judgment which transcends the limits of its authority, and a judgment is void if it is beyond the powers granted to the court by the law of its organization, i.e. the Constitution. In other words, without an authority to enforce a non-apportioned direct tax, what they've been doing is fraud, unconstitutional, even where the court has jurisdiction over the parties and the subject matter. Thus, if a court is authorized by statute to entertain jurisdiction in a particular case only, like enforcing ATF under Title 27, Part 70, which is where all the enforcement statutes are published, and undertakes to exercise the jurisdiction conferred in a case to which the statute has no application, you mean like a Title 26 enforcement action? All enforceable under Title 27 for indirect excise, but not enforceable under Title 26 as a direct tax. And undertakes to exercise the jurisdiction conferred in a case to which the statute has no application, the judgment rendered is void. Void. They exceeded their constitutional authority and acted ultra vires, without authority, and that's what they've been doing for 60 years, enforcing the income tax ultra vires outside of the Constitution as a direct tax on labor, not as an indirect tax on indirectly taxable activities and transactions, foreigners, import, export, in foreign places, in foreign countries under tax treaty, licenses, commodities, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and the corporate privilege. Without some underlying impost, duty, or excise power, there is no taxation. The lack of statutory authority to make a particular order or a judgment is akin to a lack of subject matter jurisdiction and is subject to collateral attack. The whole system is a constitutional fraud. The Supreme Court has exposed it, and nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody understands. It's right there in black and white. They're claiming the power to tax directly and without limitation. That's communism, the second plank of the Communist Manifesto, a heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax. That's where you find graduated taxation, not in the Constitution. It has to be uniform. And it's not. This is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. I hear the end of the show coming up. We'll be back next week with more about more, because it's the end of the game for the federal government. And the sooner the rest of you wake up to that reality, the better off we will all be for the rest of all time. Thank you.